Greetings. I'm going to be giving a talk that's in response to Moin Syed's recent paper, looking a little bit at some of those considerations and concerns about race, ethnicity, and culture in personality science, and really some of the difficulties in making some clear connections with race, personality, culture, personality, and ethnicity, personality. We'll be talking a little bit about some considerations for some of the steps that we as scholars and researchers can maybe consider thinking about our own work, thinking about ways of enlisting the assistance of others, other rising scholars, our current trainees, colleagues and collaborators, other community members even, and getting more voices and more perspectives at the table that may also help us in thinking of ways to be more purposeful and a little bit stronger at some of those ways of looking at, discussing, incorporating purposeful, systematic considerations of race, ethnicity, and culture. When we're talking about personality science, when we're talking about ways of understanding aspects of traits, character, life reasoning, and beyond, and human behavior. So just a brief review of some of the things that Moin and others have been talking about recently. Moin shared this paper, and part of his talk centers on this paper that he recently presented with others, thinking about some of the current challenges, some of the current limitations, some of the ways that we're approaching science, and we're still struggling to think in the ways that are very thorough, systematic, and purposeful, and really sufficient in a lot of ways when it comes to talking about race, ethnicity, and culture, and personality research, and broader personality science. There are a number of important points that he brings up in that earlier paper and in the recent talk that he shares. But two of the bigger takeaways from that work is that for a number of years, for a number of studies, some that continue to rise to the forefront, even in very recent work, there is an overemphasis and sometimes an unintentional, if not very direct and explicit, sort of assumption being made that when we're talking about personality, we're really talking on centering on a set, whatever that set may look like, of traits, and we're sometimes limiting ourselves and not moving well beyond that consideration of traits. That heavy focus on traits is not the only way of capturing personality. And if you ask a number of researchers and scholars, they would not presume that such a focus on traits is well representative of the richness that personality can really involve for individuals. But when we're talking about a lot of the work that's moving, we're talking about a lot of ways that science is communicated, there tends to be that overemphasis on traits as being very central, or being the sort of main aspect to consider and measure and assess and talk about and discuss. And we want to try to move away from that. We want to think more broadly. We want to think purposefully about other important characteristics. We want to think purposefully about other ways people are reasoning about their lives, ways that may be a bit more closely aligned with or impacted by culture, in ways that we might miss out on if we are only focusing heavily on traits. And also thinking of the other major connections to personality science that have implications for multiple levels of ways we can assess and measure personality. Thinking of biological factors that might be relevant, thinking of social factors that might be relevant, and how they can fit in differently. We're thinking about things like character, things like life reasoning, in addition to traits that are very important. The second major point that Moin discusses a bit is that there are different ways of conceptualizing diversity. Diversity very broadly mentioned here, the many different ways that we can think about, including race and ethnicity, but also focusing on sex, focusing on gender, focusing on sexuality, focusing on religion, focusing on socioeconomic background, disability, so on and so forth, in many, many rich ways that diversity can and should be considered. But in a lot of the studies that we consider, you can have diversity between different settings between major societies and cultures. We've got some work that touches on that fairly well. Is a point that a number of folks I think will bring up. There's also diversity within each society, within each culture. Individuals in one or perhaps many ways who are minoritized and sometimes marginalized within a certain society. And we struggle within major cultures, within major societies to really appreciate that richness of diversity within each culture. That's another level that still deserves a lot more attention, a lot more focus. That's one of the major points that Maureen shares as well, that we need to not only be looking at how personality may be reported or observed, captured in some way among individuals in the United States and individuals in Canada and France and Japan and Brazil and so on and so forth. But we also need to be looking within each of those societies as well to look for the richness in individuals who are belonging to different age groups, different genders, identifying with different genders, identifying with different racial groups, so on and so forth, to capture more nuance, more aspects of richness and perhaps overlap and similarity and perhaps areas of nuance within societies. So a lot of work that can and should be done in regards to that. One of the latter points from Moyne and from other colleagues sharing talks right now is that we need to be thinking in some very purposeful ways again about how we can change some ways we're doing some of this work, how we can be better about measuring personality in a richer way, a more representative way for a number of individuals, how we can be better about being systematic and purposeful in addressing forms of diversity in the field so that the science really does better capture, better represent the many types of people who are being brought to the table who we should be thinking about keeping in mind, who we're making some assumptions about or when we're presenting this work. We want to make sure that's capturing their experience as well. If we are seeing some purposeful, if we are seeing what seem to be systematic differences, aspects of variability that seem to break down between groups, that we're being purposeful and also thinking of the possible mechanisms, the possible underlying factors that may be helping explain why we're seeing some of those differences, not just assuming that it's the group placement or group affiliation for whatever reason. It's not just that this group of individuals are from India and this group of individuals are from China that we're seeing differences, but that there's some mechanisms at play that we hopefully are getting at some level. And in some way, they're going to help us strengthen our science and strengthen the ways that we're making sense of human behaviors. What I want to spend a little bit of time doing today is building on that idea of what are some of the ways we can try to be a little bit more purposeful and do a little bit better. And one of the ideas that comes to mind is on my end is that, yes, there are steps that we as scholars, we as researchers, we as professionals should be taking upon ourselves, ways that we should be trying to change and refine and strengthen some ways that we're conducting our own work, ways that we're making sense of our own research, so that it's in an even better position, that we are contributing, hopefully in some positive ways, to the ways that big questions, if they're on facets of race and ethnicity, how they are salient and important for understanding personality, that we're doing a better job of contributing to those questions. If and when, really, should we win? We want to be doing this more often and pretty much including a much clearer and systematic purpose, weaving that into a lot of our work. As colleagues like Monisha Pasupathy are bringing up as well, that these are facets that are already key and central to research, whether we recognize them or not. We need to be purposeful and clear about recognizing them, but also thinking about the importance of culture, how to bring that in. So there are a number of steps I think we can, and many people have already talked about, we can take upon ourselves to do a little bit better. I'll touch on that lightly today. But I also want to be thinking about ways that we can enlist others, ways that we can engage with additional colleagues and collaborators, ways that we can make sure folks are getting brought to the table, being brought on board, who are bringing important, rich insights that will help us directly do a better job of this, that will challenge us, some of the assumptions we continue to bring to the fold when it comes to our work that will push us to think purposefully about what we're really seeing, whether some of the assumptions we're making about our findings and some of the discussion points we're making, maybe if they hold apart as well, if we're really doing a good job of capturing and representing that, and ways that we can do better in getting more folks moving into the field who are going to be bringing rich perspectives and insights with them. So that, again, we're hopefully continuing to see a field that is increasingly diverse, asking questions as a result of that increasing diversity that are going to help us approach important topics on personality in many different ways we can capture personality with different insights, perspectives, viewpoints, and so on, different philosophies, and so on, and ways that we can make sure that we are strengthening our own work, mentoring, modeling approaches that are going to be influential and well-equipping our rising scholars, our rising students, our grad students and undergrads and so on, to be in a little bit better position as well, to not depend on some older assumptions, some older approaches that may not hold as well going forward, to not depend on sort of falling back and falling into comfort zones that may leave them more likely to not advance as well as they could or should, given what we're continuing to see as areas of need in the field. So thinking a little bit on each of those. So just briefly, one of the first points I want to talk about is this brief idea on making the science more accessible in a few ways, with the goal of getting feedback from various others, others who are going to, again, bring some different perspectives, challenges in some important ways, and also bringing more scholars, representing more backgrounds, more fields, more perspectives into personality science, getting more folks thinking in slightly different ways about how to approach important questions about traits, about aspects of reasoning, about facets of character, so on and so forth, that are going to push us to reconsider some of the approaches, especially some of the ones we've been really comfortable with for a long time that seem to work okay, but maybe could be better. Push us to continue considering what we're doing, what are our assumptions going forward, and so on. So in thinking about some of these questions on access, communication, engagement when it comes to science, thinking of ways that we can sometimes, as the folks already engaging in science, do a little bit more to bring our work to others. Those others could be very local, very near to us. Many of us are working in communities where the community members who live and work around us are the same kinds of folks we're very interested in studying, understanding more about, and the work we're collecting should be relevant to their lives. And if there are some ways that we can engage back with those community members, have more conversations about what we're seeing, some of the assumptions we're making, what might be helpful for them to hear, helpful to hear. Does that seem to make sense to you all? What are we capturing here? Might be some nice ways to also get some constructive dialogues, get some constructive feedback, and again, get from a very different set of perspectives, folks who don't have the same training, who are seeing some of the day-to-day behaviors and coming up with some of their own ways of making sense of that, hearing from them where things make sense, where maybe they don't. It's not going to likely cause us to drop everything that we're doing if someone is pushing back a little bit, but it keeps in the forefront of our minds how well can we explain some of the theories that we're depending on. If someone's asking some questions, can we make sense of some of the questions that are lingering for others who are hearing about our work? Are we, again, well representing? Are we studying fairly diverse, fairly inclusive samples that look like the communities we're engaged with otherwise? Are we capturing behaviors and aspects of personality that seem to be representative of the communities that we're working in and around? And if there's some question marks on that, that's another area, it's another nice way for us to continue thinking about strengthening, refining, and improving our research programs, our research approaches. So there can be some insights just with engagement and local communication that could be directly applicable, directly beneficial for some of our ongoing lab work, our ongoing research questions, and so on. There are also ways of thinking more regional, national, international, and so on, and engaging more at the community level, engaging more, and in this sense, thinking more at student level, thinking of ways to bring our science to others and engage with others. Again, with the idea of trying to improve and strengthen a pipeline of rising scholars, scholars who are going to be interested in personality science, scholars who are going to represent a number of different backgrounds, bring some really cool and novel questions and perspectives, and perhaps even philosophies with them as we're coming into the field, who are going to challenge us in some important ways. So thinking of ways that as individuals or as programs even, we can continue being systematic and purposeful in reaching out to more scholars representing more backgrounds. There's a lot of room to go. Thinking of personality broadly and psychology broadly and personality psychology in particular. There are some long-standing regional and national meetings. This is more biased toward the US at this moment. There may be some really good meetings in other parts of the world that I'm just less familiar with as well. But ways that we can try to engage with more students who are representing diversity within our society. When we're thinking of facets of racial and ethnic diversity, sometimes facets of ability and disability, some meetings as well. But meetings such as ABRCAMS, it's the annual biomedical research conference for minority scholars, one of the largest gatherings yearly for students who are traditionally underrepresented given their racial or ethnic backgrounds. High quality scientific scholars presenting research, looking at graduate programs interested in moving to the next step, who would appreciate hearing from more scholars who want to see them moving on to, and contributing to the field further. And again, these might be scholars who are bringing additional perspectives, backgrounds, experiences to the table that may inform how they're going to continue approaching research questions and challenge us as more established, relatively more established individuals, folks who might have been doing work in some certain ways and some ways we're comfortable for a while. Hearing some of those additional approaches and perspectives can give us pause, give us a reason to think further on that. Having individuals who are always contributing to our labs in some important ways is really helpful here. There were other meetings as well, meetings like SACNAS, which is focused on advancing Chicanos and Hispanics and Native Americans in science, similar initiatives and so on. McNair, Scholars Parliament, also has an annual conference. Other similarly focused groups holding regional and national meetings as well. There can be those opportunities to reach out to, engage with, and encourage more students representing more backgrounds to apply, if not to your lab directly, to your program, to other promising programs, getting more folks into our field, into our science, which can always have those nice downstream implications. We're thinking of ways to be more purposeful, bring more perspectives in, and be a little bit clearer in how we're thinking about race, ethnicity, and culture as being relevant to our work, relevant to our daily lives. Can also think of some of the ways that we're thinking of representation. What and who is being represented in our work. Again, I can talk all day long about samples, how well our samples are doing at representing various forms of diversity. We're not, and so on. But there are also ways of thinking about the kinds of tools, the kinds of approaches, the kinds of reasoning and thinking that we bring to the table, and why. Why are those the approaches we're most comfortable with? Why are they the ones that seem to be the best fit? They seem to be most right. So there are ways of thinking about what is it about us as the scholars? What's being represented in our work, in our perspectives, in our approaches? What are the fundamental baseline philosophies of what is quality science that drive us, that make us feel like certain forms of methodology, certain forms of analysis are more appropriate than others? And certain tools, forms of assessment, or ways of sticking to certain items and constructs we want to really measure the most. For those of us who are a bit more focused on traits and have some more trouble moving to other areas, why is that? What is it that is going on from our own training, our own experiences today that are really shaping and honing a lot of the questions and a lot of the approaches we're using? So being able to step back and reconsider that at times is also something that can be really helpful and beneficial for us as individuals, thinking about what's being represented in our work and kind of why we're using certain approaches. Similarly, we can ask about who else is being brought to the table, who else is getting the chance to contribute and lend their assistance as well, or lend their expertise, excuse me, as well. This is particularly thinking of different societies and the emphasis, the opportunities for scientists and researchers across different societies to contribute meaningfully to our field. Thinking about, don't want to, for more sake, I don't want to focus on weird as being the major areas of emphasis, but we know that we've got a number of colleagues in non-Western societies, in particular in the world. Thinking of colleagues across Central and South America, thinking of colleagues across Africa, thinking of colleagues across some parts of Southern Asia and so on, who aren't getting quite the same or proportional so opportunities for reviewing some important works and helping shape the field, what's getting feedback, what's getting opportunities to move forward, some of the opportunities for outlets and research publications moving forward, being well supported in different parts of the world, capturing some of the richness of science going on within major societies. There are fewer, drastically fewer opportunities in some instances. And thinking of some of the opportunities for conferences, those major areas for exchanging of ideas, building collaborations, presenting quality work, being accessible and being physically located in different societies, cultures, and so on. We know that there's some discrepancies there, a lot of discrepancies there. And it's costly and it's hard to travel internationally. So thinking of some of those constraints, some of those challenges, who's getting to come to the table can also be a really important question. Again, for who's going to have some of those opportunities to continue shaping the field with their own work, with collaborative work that's going to drive forward some new insights, some new perspectives, challenge some of the currently dominant forms of thinking, and help us as a collective think about some purposeful approaches and being better about incorporating facets of race, ethnicity, and culture in our work. Thinking of the ways that we are bringing scholars representing multiple cultures to the table, multiple ethnicities to the table, would be a major way of doing better in regard to that. One of the last points I want to bring up is this importance of mentoring, of ways that we are bringing rising scholars into the fold, making sure that we are modeling, as we're making improvements to our own work, hopefully modeling for our students some of the better approaches, some of the better considerations for how we can approach multiple aspects of personality, think about the relevance of culture across the methodologies we're using, the assumptions we're making for our findings, and beyond. And really showcasing that repeatedly, thoroughly in our own work, getting our students on board with those approaches to personality science as well, as one means of modeling and hopefully supporting rising scholars in some pretty thorough ways. And then also thinking of some of the ways that across our students' graduate careers that we're doing a better job of providing that feedback and guidance that, again, is going to better situate them for incorporating the ongoing insights we're getting about doing a little bit better, being a little bit more purposeful, being a little bit clearer with how we're incorporating facets of race and ethnicity into our science and focus on personality science, how we're doing a better job of studying multiple facets of personality science, and how we're communicating that, how we're trying to avoid some of our biased language, how we're trying to avoid some of the assumptions and takeaways we might otherwise have if we're not thinking as cleanly on things like mechanisms. If we're falling back into, well, we saw these differences and there's got to just be something wrong with group X because they didn't show the same thing as group Y, so on and so forth. Trying to do a better job of providing feedback for our students as they're designing their own projects, as they're looking toward thesis work, dissertation work, and so on, as they are taking the lead on a number of manuscripts, making sure that we're preparing them as best as possible so that they're able to really incorporate some of the things that we've worked through over the past years and are trying to be better about ourselves, trying to start them off on the right foot as they move into their next steps would be incredibly helpful here. So those are just some points, and I'm going to stop now because I'm going over my intended time as it is. But some of those points in response to what was shared by Moyne and others, trying to think purposefully about some of these different ways that within the science, within the philosophies and the theories that we're bringing to the table, how we can be very purposeful and systematic about our consideration and incorporation of a focus on race, ethnicity, and culture in personality science, thinking of ways as well to hopefully be able to enlist others for the insistence of building a more inclusive, representative, engaged, and diverse field, a field that's going to be increasingly ready to tackle some of these challenges, to think together and to push each other on some of these questions. So I look forward to talking more in the coming weeks, and thank you for your time.